Good Monday. This is Jay Brew, co-chairman of Seafried and Brew. Well, this is sort of the culmination of our discussion on net overhead. And when we look at it, we wanted to put some numbers to this because 2 weeks ago we talked about non-interest expense and being able to control non-interest expense. Along with it is that we talked about an idea for non-interest income last week. But what would this do to a bank? Well, what's interesting is that on the non-interest income side, we had given the idea last week of using IPI out of San Antonio, Texas for non-deposit type services, that broker in your branch. And we had given the number last week that on average their customer base gets a 1.49% non-interest income to average assets. Well, what is that in numbers? I wanted to know. So when you look at it, the difference is compared to the national benchmark that it's $3,450,000 in terms of overall dollars. Using IPI at 1.49, that works out to total non-interest income of $7,450,000. $4 million more in terms of non-interest income. Think of that. This is on average for a $500 million bank. Think of that going into your bottom line. Think about it from the standpoint of what this would do to this year's budget if you were producing those kind of numbers. And then I talked about Embassy Bank in terms of that non-interest expense and how great the bank that I'm a co-founding director of has done in terms of non-interest expense. And if you remember, I told you that their non-interest expense was 2.04% of average assets. A low number, but now let's put it into dollars. The national benchmark in terms of non-interest expense, $13,600,000. What is Embassy on a $500 million bank at 2.04? $200,000. Think of that in terms of a difference of almost $3,400,000. Now, we all know what net overhead does. Net overhead is that difference between non-interest expense and non-interest income. And we think about net overhead. Let's look at the national benchmark in terms of net overhead. We're looking at the difference between that non-interest expense, non-interest income that we just went through in those slides, is that it would bring it down to a 0.55% in terms of overall net overhead as a percent of average assets. Think about that compared to the national benchmark, which is at 2.03. So when we look at it, let's talk about dollars. What is the difference in dollars? Well, in terms of the national benchmark, they're at $10,150,000 on a $500 million bank. Amazingly enough, we're looking at using the Embassy Bank non-interest expense, the IPI average non-interest income. We're looking at a total of $2,750,000. Look at the vast difference between that two. On a total basis, if one were to put in a strategy of equaling those two numbers, because it is possible that community banks can do this, is that you're looking at $7,400,000 going to that bottom line. And we look at it as a going forward strategy, is that I believe that strategically community banks in the future must be able to control this net overhead at an extreme basis to be able not only to survive but to thrive. This is Jay Brew, co-chairman of Seafried and Brew. Have a great week.